You can listen to The Front on your smart speaker every morning. To hear the latest episode, just say, "Play the news from The Australian."
From The Australian, here's what's on the front. I'm Claire Harvey. It's Tuesday, August 13. Chatbots will be writing lesson plans and assignments in a new Education Department trial, even as teachers are warned to check the bots' answers. Australia could be left high and dry on the nuclear submarine deal, with new treaty documents revealing the US and UK can pull out with just 1 year's notice if they decide it threatens their own defence plans. That's an exclusive live now at theaustralian.com.au. The government released dangerous non-citizens into the community with no visas and no way to monitor them, and then misled the public about it. That's an exclusive in The Australian today, and today's deep dive on The Front.
This is the issue that Anthony Albanese wanted to have off the agenda, but it is back to haunt the government and the new Minister for Immigration and Home Affairs, Tony Burke.
The issue is illegal immigration, boat people, border security, and it's the soundtrack to the Labor Party's nightmares.
Elements in the coalition's plan to stop the boats.
Finally and fully stop the boats.
Stopping the boats. Now,
I'm interested in stopping the boats, and why I'm interested in stopping the boats,
you have to have the willingness.
we are going to stop the boats.
Ever since they lost the 2013 election to Tony Abbott, in large part because of a surge in unauthorised maritime arrivals, Labor has a long-term case of the heebie-jeebies about border integrity coming back to bite it. And in November 2023, it really did.
The immigration laws have been shaken up by a High Court ruling.
For the last 20 years, the Australian government has been able to detain non-citizens who don't have a valid visa or any prospect of deportation. But the High Court has ruled that process is unlawful.
The test case at the centre of that monumental High Court decision can be named only as NZYQ. He arrived by boat, aged about 16, in 2012, at the height of the influx of boats. NZYQ is from Myanmar's persecuted Rohingya community. After arriving in Australia and being granted a temporary visa, he sexually assaulted another Rohingya refugee, a 10-year-old boy. NZYQ has served a prison term for that offence, but on his release from jail, the government deemed him not a legitimate refugee. He had committed a serious criminal offence which deemed him ineligible for Australian citizenship, but when they tried to send him back to Myanmar, he refused to go. The government held NZYQ in immigration detention at Sydney's Villawood Centre, and the High Court ruled that was illegal. The court said if a non-Australian citizen is refusing to go back to their country of origin, Australia cannot hold them in indefinite detention. That decision also freed another 150 detainees, including some serious offenders, murderers and rapists. For most of the year, it's been a rolling disaster in Parliament.
An immigration detainee and child sex offender released by the High Court has been arrested in Dandenong, accused of using social media to contact children.
This is the reality of the High Court's decision. The government did not choose to be in this position.
Last month, Anthony Albanese demoted the two ministers in charge, Home Affairs Minister Claire O'Neill and Albanese's old friend, Immigration Minister Andrew Giles. The PM installed Tony Burke in their place to try and resolve this issue before the next election, due by September 2025.
Claire, well, I think what it shows is that you can change your front bench, you can change the minister, but it doesn't mean the political problems go away.
Joe Kelly is The Australian's National Affairs editor.
So we've got a new minister in the Immigration and Home Affairs portfolio in Tony Burke, but he still has to clean up the mess that Andrew Giles left behind. There are new questions about the government's response and, in particular, some of its claims at the time that all the people who were released from immigration detention were subject to strict visa conditions.
All of those who have been released from detention have been granted and are on visas with appropriate conditions.
There are new documents which now question those claims, and in particular, some of the statements that Mr. Giles made to Parliament last November, just days after the landmark High Court decision, and now Tony Burke is left in the invidious position of having to deal with all of that.
Labor suffers from a bit of intergenerational trauma on asylum seekers, boat people, border integrity. Their hearts must sink when they see questions on this topic coming from you, Joe, across their email.
Well, it's just a distraction for them at this stage. They really don't want to be talking about this. This is just bringing up negative stories from the past that they don't really want to have to deal with.
Back in May, when the government was really floundering around on this issue, Andrew Giles, the then minister, said this on Sky News.
There is $250 million that we've invested in supporting our law enforcement agencies to enforce that. And that's enabled things like using drones to keep track of these people. We know where they are.
Drones? Monitoring the people who'd been released by the High Court? Australia's military doesn't even have a functional drone fleet. Who knew the Immigration Department had eyes in the sky, peering in the bedroom windows of High Court emancipees? Turns out that was completely wrong. There were no drones at all. And Giles had to admit it.
I relied on information provided by my department at the time, which has since been clarified.
Members on my left.
Today, Joe is revealing documents obtained by the Coalition under Freedom of Information laws that show what was really going on in the background as the minister was on his feet in Parliament.
What we have uncovered are a number of documents under Freedom of Information laws, and these are submissions that the department made to the then Minister Andrew Giles. So we have 8 submissions from the department to Andrew Giles between November 10 and November 16. And it's apparent from these submissions that there are individuals who have been released into the community following the NZYQ decision and are residing in the community as unlawful non-citizens. And in each of these submissions, Mr. Giles is being asked to transition a cohort of people onto bridging visas. So it becomes clear that following the NZYQ decision, very quickly, large numbers of people were released from immigration detention into the community at large. They were not placed on appropriate visas with strict conditions, and the government had to subsequently, after the fact of their release, transition them onto bridging visas.
Joe asked the government detailed questions about this, and new Minister Tony Burke said simply the government doesn't want these people in the community at all and will put restrictions on them to the maximum extent allowed by the law. Burke didn't explain why they only granted the visas after allowing the detainees out of custody. The consequences of the High Court decision are still flowing. An Eritrean man who was convicted of violent stabbing assaults, threatening to kill and arson is now in the High Court seeking to avoid the surveillance conditions. Lawyers for the man say wearing an ankle bracelet and having a nightly curfew are an infringement on his liberty. That story's live now at theaustralian.com.au. So, will immigration decide yet another election? We'll be back after this break. So Labor's dealing with today's crisis in immigration, as well as a rolling disaster where it's been trying and failing to deport other non-citizens who commit crimes here in Australia. So I asked Joe, Labor just keeps taking the hits on immigration and border protection. The party has done years of soul-searching on this issue. Where does Labor actually stand now?
I think that there's been a bit of a road to Damascus moment for Labor over the last 15 years on border protection. We had the dismantling of the Howard government's tougher position under the former Rudd and Gillard governments, where we saw so many boats coming to Australia. And of course, the tragedy of that was that so many people, unfortunately, lost their lives. So I think there was a debate over what truly is the most compassionate and humane policy. I think Labor initially thought we need to have a compassionate and humane policy, and we're not going to agree to these tough border protection measures. But I think what essentially we've seen when Labor was trying to get back into government, that they decided that actually it is humane, it is compassionate to have a tougher approach on the borders, because we're essentially stopping people risking their lives coming to Australia in these leaky boats. And so one of the political questions that arises from that, Claire, I think is this road to Damascus moment for Labor on border protection genuine? Or is this just something that they said and they're going through the motions with because they knew they needed to do that to win and stay in government? So there are questions about Andrew Giles's true convictions in this regard, and also to an extent Anthony Albanese as well. So it's a tricky issue for them, and obviously there's a lot of people in their base and on the left wing of the party who don't like this move to the centre that Labor's undergone over the last several years on this particular issue.
The other big trial raging at the moment is, of course, Linda Reynolds versus Brittany Higgins in the WA Supreme Court. On Tuesday, Scott Morrison's in the witness box. You can follow it live at theaustralian.com.au.